Hang on.
Okay.
Hold on one second. All right, we are recording. So, welcome everybody. My name is Matt Hardy, the Program Director for Planning and Policy at AASHTO, and this is the second in the Transportation Asset Management Guide, a Focus on Implementation webinar series. Today it's the guide overview and getting started. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please do not put your phone, please do put your phone, please do not put your phone on hold. Sometimes there is music in the background when you put this on hold, and that everybody can hear you. So please do not put your phone on hold. Please do mute your phone. If you do not have a mute button on your phone, you can press *6 on the keypad. *6 can toggle on and off. So please put your phone on mute. And if for some reason there becomes a lot of background noise, we hear a lot of background noise, I'm going to hit *5 to mute everybody, and then the presenters, when they have to talk, will hit *6 to unmute themselves. But I'd rather not do that. And if you don't see the entire screen, please hit F5, and that will toggle between sort of a full screen mode, and if you want to get out of that full screen mode, hit escape, and that will take you out of the full screen mode. And the one last thing I want to mention is that these webinars are being recorded. And Webinar 1 is now up on YouTube as a hosting site, and there will be a link to it from the Subcommittee on Asset Management website. So sometime tomorrow, go to tam.transportation.org, and there's a link to webinars, and you'll be able to view Webinar 1 from 2 weeks ago if you were not able to join us. So with that,
you want to talk about the
question? Oh, yeah. At the very end, we are going to leave some time for questions and answers. The best way to submit your question is through the question and answer feature within the live meeting service. It's in the the top bar there. It says Q&A. That's the best way to sort of type your question out, and at the very end, I'll basically go through those first come, first serve in terms of questions. And if for some reason we need to sort of do like an audio follow-on to one of the specific questions, I'll just sort of call on that person to sort of follow up or whatever. So that's the sort of the logistics. Everything went well last time. I hope it goes well this time. We have a lot of great people. So anyways, Jana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. I'm going to turn it first to Kirk Steidel, who's the director of the Michigan DOT and also the current AASHTO president and former chair of the AASHTO Asset Management Subcommittee. And he's just going to share a few of his thoughts on asset management.
Thanks, Jana, and thanks everybody for being on the line today, and to the Asset Management Committee and Federal Highway, thanks for sponsoring this. Thanks for doing the webinar series. This is a great way to get information out at a much more economical price tag than having everybody drive and travel to a central city somewhere. Well, all of that sounds great. All of us are really just too busy anymore to do that, and there's so much valuable information that's been gathered that this is a great way to share it. So thanks for that. Thanks, Matt and Jana, the rest of you. AASHTO has been a very strong proponent of asset management principles. In fact, it dates back to the late 90s when a task force was created to look at asset management, and should this be an issue that states should be reviewing. Now, that task force ultimately turned into the Subcommittee on Asset Management, of which, as Jana said, I used to be chair of. I now have turned that over, and Anath Prasan from Florida is heading that, and is going to do a tremendous job with it as I move into this year as the AASHTO president. The Asset Management Committee has really done a lot over the years to help highlight the asset management principles, and the fact that it really is just a better way to run our businesses. I mean, run them like a business and treat all the roads and bridges as assets that have to be managed through their entire life. Now, one of the things that was produced is the asset management guide that we're going to hear about in this webinar. there actually was an asset management guide that was produced before this that was the precursor. It was back in like 2000 or 2001 that really got the discussion going as well. Now, the Asset Management Committee is not the only one working on this. There's also a standing committee on performance management, which is essentially taking the same principles and applying it to a larger view and actually performance of the transportation network. So asset management is dealing with the physical assets, and performance management is dealing with the performance on a little higher level. And if there was any doubt as to the importance of performance management and asset management, all you need to do is look at the recently released or passed Senate transportation bill, which is called MAP 21, and that had performance management and asset management in that bill and make it an integral part of the way DOTs do business. So, like it or not, developing an asset management plan and establishing those performance measures, setting the targets, and all the rest of the process are going to be a very key piece of what we all do in DOTs on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to be looked at for how we perform and manage the public's assets and the public's resources. And, implementing this isn't really radical. It's not a huge shift. I mean, frankly, from, an organization that is largely planners and engineers, it really is a logical extension of how do you look at this entire network when you only have limited resources. I'll go back to something that was said in 1999 that was said then by Secretary Mary Peters, that would be Secretary of the Arizona DOT, maybe it's Director, that said, $1 left. Where would I spend it? And that's really the impetus. All of us are faced right now with declining resources, and we're having that same question back in our offices. Okay, I only have $1 left. Where does it go? Does it go to this project, or this project? Does it go to a road? Does it go to a bridge? Does it go to a transit facility? Where does it go? And that's really what we all are facing, and what I think, frankly, is really the impetus for an asset management approach. As the president of AASHTO, one of my focus areas for the year is on performance management and asset management. So this webinar is very timely. I'm encouraging more and more of this discussion so that people begin to think about the whole life of these assets and how do we manage them to the best way possible. So there's lots of tools that are available to you. This guide is a tremendous guide. I encourage you to really dive in and take the examples that are here and see how you can apply them. It's written in such a way that it's not prescriptive. It says you must do A, B, C, D, and E. It's written in a way that it's a tool that enables you to pull the pieces that fit your organization, but gives you the overall principles of where you've got to be going. So there's a number of things that you have available to you. Each state got 10 copies of this guide sent to you. If you don't know where those are at, you might chase them back to the organization because there's 10 of them sitting in your DOT somewhere. The webinars are being recorded, as Matt said, so you can view them later, or you could pull together a staff meeting or individual members of your organization that you feel they really need to see this and understand it. There's people that are on the phone. All the presenters are certainly open to your calls if you've got questions, if you've got issues that you're trying to work through. There's a lot of people that would be more than happy to spend a little time on the phone with you and help you out. I can tell you there's two really key assets and contacts, and one is Matt Hardy with AASHTO on the Transportation Asset Management Guide, and then just asset management in general. He's a tremendous asset. And then also Steve Gay from Federal Highway. Both of them are great resources, and I would encourage you, if you have questions, give them a call, ask them how to get going or whatever you need. And if they don't know the answer, they'll get you contacted with people that do. So again, it's probably too long for a welcome, Yana. Sorry about that, but there's just lots of great stuff going on. And thanks everybody for your interest in this and your attention. And I think at the end you'll say it was worthwhile use of your time. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirk. And we're going to hear from Kirk a bit later. He's going to help deliver part of this webinar. Nastran Sadamand is going to say a few words from Federal Highways.
Good afternoon. I am Nastran Sadamand, Asset Management Program Manager with the Office of Asset Management. I would like to welcome you. Can you hear me?
I'm on a webinar.
Hello? Can
Yes.
you hear me?
I'm
Okay.
on the phone with Columbus in a webinar.
I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. This webinar is the second of 4, focused on the new AASHTO Asset Management Guide, a focus on implementation. Federal Highway Administration is presenting this webinar in cooperation with AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. And the goal is that participants would learn of approaches and examples of how to better manage their highway infrastructure assets. We hope that you find this webinar useful and applicable to your practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Nastran. All right, so let's get started. One of the suggestions after the first webinar was to introduce the people who are helping deliver and to associate who they are when they speak. So we have a lot of people who are participating in the delivery today. You've heard from Matt Hardy, from AASHTO, Kirk Steidel, from Michigan DOT, Nastran Sadadman from Highways. I'm Kiana Park from SpyPalm Partners. I'm the lead facilitator in the webinar series. We have Mark Gordon from AECOM, Paul Thompson, Laura Whipper from Oregon DOT, Corey Pope from Utah DOT, Becky Burke from Maryland State Highway Administration, Martin Kidner from Wyoming DOT, and Scott Richrath from Colorado DOT. They're all going to be helping us deliver today. And before each of their sections, I'll reintroduce them so you'll know who is speaking. So this is a slide we used last time, and we'll use each time just to set the context for those of you who may not have been here for the previous one. But we're today talking about the AASHTO Transportation Asset Management Guide. It's available, as Kirk mentioned, in hard copy, but it's also available in an electronic format, which you can get through AASHTO, and Matt will be able to connect you to that. It's actually quite useful to be able to search through both the first guide and the second guide and find what you need by using words. The Asset Management Guide, first and foremost, is designed to provide strategic guidance on how to manage your assets. It also helps all of us collectively build a common language and methods for how to deliver asset management, which thus will make it easier for each of you and us to share information and collectively become better and better. And most importantly, it's focused on the maximization of the financial resources you have, and hopefully it helps you make the case to get additional resources that you need to be a good steward of your assets. This is, the webinar series is a 4-part series. This is webinar 2, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to focus on in a minute. There'll be 2 more webinars, 2 weeks apart. So 2 weeks from now, webinar 3 will focus on the Transportation Asset Management Plan, which is really once you've figured out what it is you want to do, and then really focus on developing a plan that guides you on getting the results you're seeking and making sure that you can deliver on what you want to do with asset management. And then the final webinar 4, which will be on December 14th, 4 weeks from now, will be tools and techniques for implementing the asset management plan. And this really goes into the various items like information systems, modeling techniques, the tools that will support you as you move forward with your asset management initiative. objective of today's webinar is to first provide you with an orientation on the guide. And so Mark Gordon is going to help us walk through each of the guide chapters. And then we'll focus on how the guide can help you assess where you are and figure out how the gaps, what gaps you have between where you are today and where you want to be in the future. And Paul Thompson's going to help us walk through that. And then we'll talk about developing a strategy and scope for asset management implementation and talk about the organizational infrastructure and change management that's needed to support your asset management initiative. And we'll begin an introduction to the concept of levels of service, because it is what is used as you're doing the asset management plan, which will be covered in webinar 3.
This is just a reminder to people who have just joined us. If you can hit *6 to mute yourself, that will improve the audio quality for everybody. So again, *6 to mute yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So again, we'll start with a guide overview. We'll do the TAM assessment tools, the gap analysis tool, and the self-assessment tool. Talk about defining the scope of asset management, and then go through the organizational alignment components, change in leadership in asset management, the various organizational change frameworks that are included in the guide, and the issue of performance management standards that need to be established as you begin your asset management program, and then the brief introduction to levels of service, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A. And as Matt mentioned earlier, if you could type in your questions on the web tool, then he'll read through the questions that are asked, and we'll do our best to address them. All right. Kirk mentioned that there was a first guide, and in fact, the guide we're going to talk about today is the official title in the NCHRP project that produced the guide. It was Volume 2 of the Asset Management Guide, and the focus of it is on implementation, and that's what we're really going to talk about in this webinar series. But the two were designed to work together. And in fact, having the different perspectives, the first guide being a higher level document that sets the stage and framework for looking at asset management, and Volume 2, which has many more practical tools focused on implementation, are complementary, and we hope that you will use the two together as you embark on your efforts. One of the great things about the guide, the Volume 2, the guide we're talking about, is the roadmap kind of visuals that are included. And this one is one that we'll use in all of the webinars, which lays out the roadmap for implementing asset management and carries you through a chapter-by-chapter view of the asset management guide. And the guide is designed in a way so that when you need to just deal with one of the aspects, like lifecycle management, that's in step 11, you can actually jump in and work in that area, or you can start from step 1 and go sequentially through step 14 and fully implement an asset management program. Now I'd like to introduce Mark Gordon. He's actually calling in at 5 a.m. or 5:20 a.m. in Australia. He was the principal investigator for NCHRP 8-69, which was the project that developed the asset management guide that this webinar is based on. Mark.
Thanks, Iana, and I think I've unmuted myself, so you should all be able to hear me. Is that a yes?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Look, what I've got is a few slides here that we'll just work through chapter by chapter and just extending that roadmap concept. So the first one that you see before you here talks about, that's chapter 1. And I guess the first thing to emphasise is that this is a guide that's written for both the executive, the management of the DOT, and the practitioners. The material at the front is more strategic, and it's about your direction, taking your people along, and then towards the rear part B is the tools and practices that you need for your practitioners. So it's an overview of the structure, and it relates back to the 14 key steps that Jana showed you. So the first box on that diagram is the why. So why do we want to do transportation asset management? And really, I guess one of the key messages is that it's the way of managing your business. Managing the business of the service that you provide, the assets that you use, right through to the best long-term funding strategy. You go down to the next box and talks about the guide itself, the aims, what TAM is, and some key terms such as lifecycle asset management, the evolution path of TAM in your organisation. It also talks about the economic value of assets, and that's an important concept. The economic consumption over time, efficiency, optimisation, and stewardship that was mentioned earlier. I think the definition has moved on since Volume 1, and on the right-hand side you'll see a whole lot of words there. That's a very nice long description, I guess, and there's a lot of good terms in there. It's all about your business again. Down to the third box, guide structure, which gives you the chapter-by-chapter summary, and we're going to go through that again in a little bit more. And finally, in that last box, TAM concepts. Okay, next slide, Jana. So the purpose of TAM, and what this chapter does is to build on that self-assessment in Volume 1 and give you guidance. And it starts with setting direction for TAM. So, what are the goals that your agency wants to achieve? What's the purpose for asset management? And, you might have your own purpose, but there's a definition here that's come out of the International Infrastructure Management Manual. And it's got the terms, some important terms, what's your level of service? In the long term, what's the most cost-effective way of delivering it? And you're actually managing assets for today and tomorrow's customers. The next box is step 2, and that's your self-assessment and gap analysis. And this is in 2 parts. The first part you saw in that diagram of Fiana's, where you saw Volume 1 on the left-hand side. And that gives you an approach to undertaking a strategic self-assessment. But this guide goes further. It gives us a gap analysis, something that we can use in more detail to look at our asset management practices, at our systems and our data. And that's a structured approach that enables you to, benchmark yourself, from one year to the next. And in fact, if you're using a common framework to benchmark yourself and your practices against those of your peers. And the output will be an improvement plan. One of the things that I need to do, in the next few years, who will do them to improve my practice? The final box is the scope of TAM. So in terms of, your agency, what's important to you? Is it about getting better information about your assets? Is it about improving perhaps your economic or your technical analysis processes? Is it about your people, and generating a development path or training needs for your people? And finally, it's also about, well, how do I actually, what really is the benefit that I'm going to get from doing all of this? What's in it for me? Next slide.
Message from Angela.
So Chapter 2 helped us to define what it is that we want to achieve. But in doing that in an organisation, and especially a large one, you need the people behind you. So this chapter is really about the people in your organisation. In terms of those 5 boxes down the right-hand side, step 4, develop a change strategy. And the diagram on the right shows you a cycle there with management leadership culture and some of the factors that you need to take into account as you go through this process. And step 4, therefore, it's about responding to the outcomes of that strategic assessment and gap analysis. And if you find that you need to make significant change, then this section is for you. So in it, there's steps and tips for managing change, and importantly, some of the things that can make it trip and make it fail along the way. So I think it's a helpful section. Step 5, the next section, it's about making asset management part of the culture, so it has an ongoing life and value in your organisation. You'll be dependent on a passionate few, but you really want TAM to become a way of doing things around here. The next box, step 6. So some more practical issues relating to, to your business processes. So there's no point having processes that are actually going in a different direction to what you're trying to achieve with your TAM program. The next step, step 7, the TAM roles. So who's going to do what? We need to develop a team, a transportation asset management team. So how do we develop and support that team? And this section goes into that. And finally, step 8, performance management standards. And here's the important link between asset management and performance management. And what this does is provide you with a line of sight, from your goals of your agency right through to what gets done on the ground. And there are methods and approaches here for how to measure this at different levels. The result, the end outcome, what you do, the outputs, and what you actually need, or the inputs. So all of those things can get covered here. Next slide. Right, the TAM plan. So those first 3 chapters are about, getting your direction and getting your plans resolved. Now this is about writing it down. And, TAM plan has a lot of value. It not only documents what you do, it documents what you need to do, and it provides just for those funding programs that you're going to go to your funder for. So it's for you, it's for management, it's for staff, it's for the practitioners, and it's for those who will fund you. If you like, it's a demonstration that you're managing your assets effectively and thinking about them for the long term. A plan, an asset management plan, there's a number of ways in which you can put this together, and the guide goes into that. We call it a kind of a central management plan, or a business plan, if you like, in some ways. And in it, you will talk about the services. What services do you deliver to your customers? What assets do you use? What are the issues? And leading into things like risk, lifecycle planning, and finally programs and costs and the improvement actions that you need at the end of the day. And I think the next webinar will go into this in a bit more detail. Now, for some people, it might be a thick plan. It might be a thin plan. It might refer to a whole number of other documents that you have, but it's a point of integration. And it sits between your business strategy and the operations on the ground. So it's a tactical guidance plan. When you're developing these plans, initially they might be quite high level, so you're just capturing the things that you know. But as asset management becomes more sophisticated, you build up a much bigger database and decision making and so forth, it can become more detailed, more bottom up in nature. Okay, so just a point to think about there. And the guide helps to suggest what might be in a plan and follows the guidance in the IIMM. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're into the part B of the guide, so this is practices, so we'll just jump back to 10. That's it. No, you've gone too far. Step 10, Yana.
I'm not sure why it's, hold on.
Oh, you've missed one. There's step 10. There we go. That's the one. Whoops. Step 10. Yep. Got it. Thank you.
It jumped back, I'm not sure why.
It did. What we've got, I've got 3 slides here which kind of combine, each of them combine in part B. And we've kind of called this group strengthening service planning because, you know, this is about defining your levels of service, looking ahead at growth and demand and the things that are going to change in the future that will change demand on your assets, and finally risk management. What the chapter starts with, though, is quite a comprehensive section on agency-wide strategic performance measurement. Right, so that picks up on the point I made earlier. And it talks about the sorts of things you can measure right from your mission and goals through to the nuts and bolts details about your assets. Okay? On the right-hand side, there's a diagram which I'll talk about later when we talk about levels of service, and it just gives you that flavour from left to right, from the strategic outcome, if you like, through to what are we delivering to people on the ground. Okay, so down to levels of service, the second box, and here we're linking those performance measures to the levels of service, and that's really what that diagram illustrates. What are you doing for your customers? Down into the third box, growth and demand. So how are things changing in the economy? How is land use changing? What is happening to population? What is happening to, you know, the industry around your area? And all of these things can affect, you know, the need for assets. What's happening with the loadings of heavy vehicles on pavements and bridges? You know, what are the things that we need to look at for the future of the asset? And down into risk, and this provides a framework for managing risk, thinking about the likelihood of events, the consequence, the risk, relative risk exposure of different events, and talks about approaches to that. So here we might have natural hazards, we have incidents, and the risk of asset failure. And, you know, it's all about, you know, the loss of service. What is the risk that I will lose service, and what are the consequences of that? And then leading into risk management processes, actions that you need to take.
Listen to this?
So that's all part of the asset management equation, if you like. Okay, next box, Fiona.
Mark, I think you need to up the speed a little bit.
Will do. Okay. Time. Okay, so here we're now looking at sections that deal with getting better decision-making outcomes, strengthening lifecycle management. So this steps through, you know, the first box, how do you understand the assets that you have, the conditioning. The next box, lifecycle asset management, what are all the activities that you're engaged in, and how do you structure them to achieve the best outcomes? In the models, introduces a number of different approaches to modelling the performance of assets and decay, and you can see a little curve across to the right, and so that you can then predict the future performance of your assets and when the optimal time will be to intervene and take an action. Talks about failure modes and how the asset might fail, condition, capacity, reliability, etc. And the final section, maintenance planning, is a short section which just deals with processes for day-to-day maintenance planning, planned and unplanned, talks about reliability, and talks also about the risk of service failure. Okay, we'll go to the next. So this group now starts to deal with you know, the nitty-gritty. We've called it integration. It's bringing all of that together into your program planning process. And the little diagram on the right introduces a kind of a trade-offs model when you're looking at all of those factors. You know, how do you take all multiple factors into account and determine an optimal outcome for your program? Program delivery talks about different forms of procurement, value for money, and how you might deliver service from in-house right out to design, build, operate types of operation. Down into asset valuation and depreciation. So this talks about the economic consumption over time, how you can use this kind of information for financial planning if you don't have predictive models in place. And finally, a section, quite a comprehensive section on sustainability, which helps to think about the things that you might want to do to improve sustainability. And it covers a pretty wide range of things: climate change, energy, resource consumption, social, economic, environmental aspects, and importantly, the effects of transportation use on the environment. Okay, we'll go to the next section, which is, so now Chapter 8, this last chapter, deals with the information systems and data, and this is emphasising the need for robust data, good information and intelligence about your assets, and how systems help with all of that. So there's a number of aspects to this, and the chapter works through issues that you need to think about if you're implementing an information systems project. It looks at different options for systems, such as the enterprise resource planning, enterprise-wide solutions, right through to standalone functional approaches. And the guide suggests strategies for doing this and minimising implementation risk. It also shows in the last box how you might go about setting up your data structure, your hierarchy for your data, and then processes for managing data collection and data management. And probably an important point at the end is, setting up a program to identify the gaps in your data and how you might actually fill those gaps over time. Okay, well that gets me to the end of those slides. Thanks, Iana.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we have Laura Whipper from the Oregon DOT. She is the manager of the Asset Management Integration Group, and ODOT has been on a path of progress on asset management, and she's going to share with us their experience in getting started. Laura.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, let me just say, if you've recently joined us, please hit *6 to mute yourself, to mute your phone. Thank you.
So I have to apologize first because I'm afraid I don't have that charming accent from down under. I just have a plain old regular Oregon accent. But I could speak for quite a while about our experiences, but I'll try and keep it very brief. And I'll start with, we started looking to others. About 2004, 2005, we embarked on a journey to capture best practices from around the world. And so the second version of the TAM guide came too late for us, but I'm glad it exists now. But out of that, we developed an asset strategic plan and an implementation plan, two separate documents, as well as a communication plan, and that really was to guide our next efforts. We found that there was nothing, though, like trying it ourselves. So in 2006, we jumped into an asset management pilot project, and that really informed us moving forward from that point forward. Some of the lessons, and there were many, some of them that we learned were less is more. Surprise, surprise. An engineering organization, I would say that in a way we were engineering our implementation of asset management, and I think we were trying to engineer from the data. And we found that we really needed to start with being able to make decisions. And to make decisions we could do with a lot less information, and that really freed us to really get started and do quite a bit, make quite a bit of progress. We wanted to start with the premise of, we found a lot of folks were collecting data many times for single use, and we wanted to turn that around and work toward making, collecting it once and using it many times, and then finding a way to keep it updated.
We also, moving forward from the pilot, we documented our efforts to collect that inventory, and we found that that documentation and data collection manuals were very helpful to us later. Some other things that came from the pilot, it just so happened we were gearing up. We have a performance measure around bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and we were gearing up to report again to our legislature. But our pilot data showed that we had some problems, significant problems with the data. I think when we pulled it out of our database, we had about 3 miles of sidewalk in one community, and our inventory from the pilot showed 9 miles. So we were 300% off. And so we set about figuring out how we improve that process. Our deputy at the time said, okay, I'll make our excuses this time, but you've got to fix this before the next session. And so we set about finding ways to do that, but we certainly found that despite our other efforts, you cannot pay too much attention to maintaining the data if you want it to stay reliable. Another thing that came, on the heels of there were several initiatives for inventory, so we amassed new information, but we also found that existing information, folks did not know how to get to it. And so the FactSet tool up there, that stands for, it's an acronym like we like to do here, Features, Attributes, and Conditions Survey Statewide Transportation Improvement Program Tool, a long handle, so that's why it's FactSet. But we needed to make the data easily accessible to folks, and so we used a web-based GIS tool and integrated a lot of information that was available in various silos around the organization, and you had to know who to call. And now all of a sudden, folks have easy access to that information, and we continue to get good feedback about that and continue to maintain and update that. Then there's using the data, and that's where the 1R or paid mainly program comes in. We were able to demonstrate to our local federal highway folks that the requirement to update traffic barrier with every preservation project was really causing us to never get to grossly outdated barrier on lower volume roads, because we were paving in certain places a lot more often and updating barrier that was only slightly out of standard and really not unsafe, while leaving grossly unsafe traffic barrier in other places. And so out of that conversation came an agreement to do a paid mainly 1R program, and out of that came a requirement to maintain our data, which we are working hard to do. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll be brief here. This is something that came out of the pilot. With the energy that came out of our pilot, we developed some inventory initiatives, and you can see that we really tried to bite off a lot. We found out of the pilot we had only information around pavement, bridges, and ITS sites. And, of course, we thought we had information around bike-type facilities, but found the errors that the pilot revealed for our performance measure. And then, of course, we said about wanting to get inventory for the rest of that list up there. The basic inventory concept that came from the pilot is really, I alluded to that in the slides before, but instead of trying to engineer from the information, if we just knew type, size, location, and enough about conditions for triage, we could make decisions from that. And if we were thoughtful about the tools we used to collect the information, we could use that basic data to build on later as we followed up and responded. And that has given us, like I said, quite an agility, and we have developed statewide inventories for most of that list up there. Retaining walls and culverts retaining walls were about 20% of the way through the inventory, and culverts were about 10, and we are ramping up to push through a statewide inventory in about a year or two for culverts, so we'll complete that. So we feel like we're making good progress. I would say, too, that this, what we call the colorful chart, and it's okay, Hiana, I'll just finish, okay. That helped a lot to communicate to folks because everybody we talked to, they thought, we're doing this, we're doing asset management, getting more information is a great idea, but it takes several decades to do that. And so really this helped us define those bite-sized pieces that were empowering, and we really could move forward effectively. Okay, ready for that next slide, Hiana? Okay, this brings me to my last slide for this webinar, but where we are now is 5 years later after we had our initial strategic plan and implementation plan and communication plan. We have learned a lot in those 5 years, and we have gone back and updated that plan. It is a thin plan. I think Mark mentioned it could be thick or thin. Ours is thin, and in it includes our 4 main strategies, our implementation objectives, how we're going to communicate, and includes the technology strategy. We have revamped our asset list. It was just a bulleted list before, but now it is really a structure and an order that we can build upon. There's also, it includes there's a decision diagram, there's a decision matrix, and there are guidelines. And we just have continued to learn as we go, and this will help us as we move forward.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I'm sure this is a slide last webinar. I think it's one of the most powerful diagrams in the guide. It basically shows the asset management improvement path, and with the basic and simple notion that you have a starting state, you need to define the desired end state you're going towards. You need to develop a plan, an improvement plan on how to get there, and you need to implement it. And I think that whether you have a large initiative or a small one, a technical one versus an organizational one, all of these, this model applies. And a starting point for this is how do you figure out what your starting state is. So now I'd like to introduce Paul Thompson. He was a integral part of the NCHRP 8-69 team that developed the guide. He was also involved in the first guide when it was developed back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he's going to talk about both the gap analysis tool that's in the current guide and the self-assessment tool that was in the first guide. Paul?
Okay, great. Thanks, Yana. So I'm speaking to you from Seattle, so I'm going to continue the Pacific Northwest accent procedure that we have going here. And one of the key things that we have in the early part of the guide is a self-assessment and gap analysis. And you'll find that to be a really useful tool, as you often see in asset management. What gets measured gets done, and even asset management implementation can get measured. And so we wanted to provide an approach that you could use to measure progress, to know where you are, and to help you to set priorities on what things to improve next. It's really a part of continuous improvement, no matter where you enter this process of asset management. You're at a particular point. Everyone manages their assets one way or another, whether it's done in a simple way or a sophisticated way. So the first step is to figure out where you are so you know where you can improve next. So the improvement process is about finding gaps between where you are and where you want to be, and then figuring out how to close those gaps. So there are 2 parts, a self-assessment and a gap analysis. The self-assessment is relatively strategic, gives you the big picture view of where you are and where you might want to go next. And then the gap analysis gets into more details about what specific things would you want to do in order to make the next step of progress along the what we call the maturity scale of asset management. The next slide, please, Shanna. And I'll talk about maturity scale next, so you know what I mean. It's really a broad characterization. We don't mean it as a value judgment. It's not good or bad to be at a particular point on the maturity scale. It's just it's meant to be very factual. This is just where we are. And in order to adopt a philosophy of continuous improvement, you need to know where you are so you know what kind of improvements you can make. And typically, as you go from a very simple process to a more sophisticated or mature process, there are a number of things that typically have to occur together. It's difficult to get very sophisticated in your analysis if you don't have a pretty good set of data. You need to have a culture that is ready for the next step. You need to have a business structure that is ready for the next step, and you need to have stakeholders who are demanding that you go to the next step. All of those things kind of have to come together in order to really make progress. And so the maturity scale is just a way of looking at how agencies develop along several different dimensions in order to pull together what points on each dimension tend to come together as agencies advance. So you can think of it as kind of a screening tool. It's really just to help you understand where you are and to know whether particular types of new techniques are appropriate for you, or maybe the agency might not be ready yet, or you may even be past the point of being ready for some of them. So this will help you to figure that out. Basically, it's a shorthand, easy way to classify yourself, so you know where in the asset management guide you'll want to look to see what to do next. Okay, Anna? So there are 5 stages in the maturity scale, and I'll walk you through them. What we call the initial stage basically has little or no effective support from strategy processes or tools in asset management, and there might even be a lack of motivation to improve. You might hear people in your organization say, well, we don't have any tools and we're doing just fine. That would be the initial stage. You collect data. Every state and a great many local governments collect, for example, bridge inspection data, and they send it off to the Federal Highway Administration because that's required by law. But in a great many cases, the agency doesn't do anything with that data besides pass it along. And if that describes where you are, then that might be evidence that you're in the initial stage. And you can also look at several other dimensions of analysis and culture and procedures and processes that may group you into this initial stage of asset management. So then we can, once you get past that, you can go on to the next stage, which is the awakening stage. So here you're at the point where you've realized that you need to do something. And I suspect that most of the people on this call are at least at this stage, because unfortunately the people in the initial stage often don't dial into webinars about asset management. But hopefully at least you're at the awakening stage. So at this point you recognize a need. You're doing some basic data collection. But a lot of times in order to get anything done in asset management, you rely on heroic effort of individuals. So if you look at your agency and you can point to 1 or 2 people who are carrying all the water for asset management, then that might be evidence that you're at this stage. You might actually have management systems, and they might be informing a few people in your organization, but you aren't really able to integrate that with business processes so far. So next stage. Stage 3, which we call the structure stage. At this point, you have a shared understanding of at least some aspects of asset management, and by shared I mean across different people in the organization. You might have some motivation and coordination going on. It is mostly vertical, however. So you have this typical silo-based approach that people often encounter when they're at the mid-stages of maturity in asset management. There's a vertical flow of information, but not so much horizontal flow because people haven't standardized or learned how to understand the concerns that bridge the gaps between the different silos in the organization. So information flows up, but not so much across. Okay, next stage. The proficient stage has flows of information in both directions, vertical and horizontal. Here you have expectations and accountability that are drawn from your asset management processes and tools. So this is important when people start to understand what to expect from other parts of the organization based on what they see in the asset management tools or reports or information that gets communicated. So now you start to see a breaking out of the silo-based approach and different parts of the organization working together using asset management as the vehicle for communicating and understanding each other and knowing how to work together. You also have a more sophisticated view of stakeholders at the proficient stage where you're not just sending data to federal highways, but you're communicating with a number of different stakeholders and with the public on how you're doing in asset management and what the expectations should be for a year or two down the road as far as how things might improve. So if we move on then to the fifth stage, we get to the best practice stage. And here you're not only being proficient in asset management, but you're actually measuring how you're doing and tracking how well your processes are working and how well your performance is doing over time, and you have processes to continue to improve. This best practice stage just illustrates the fact that no matter how good you are at asset management, you can always get better. And when as an organization, you recognize that you can always get better and continue to try to get better even though you feel like you're already proficient, that's the best practice stage of asset management. Okay, next slide. So with that strategic self-assessment, we then can drill down into some more detail about just what we mean by the different stages of maturity and how you can tell if you're there and what things you might want to do next. To help you with that, we developed what's called a gap analysis tool. And it's actually a spreadsheet that you can get along with that spreadsheet is just an example, but it's something that will guide your thought process in looking at evidence of different maturity levels on the scale and scoring yourself so you can basically take a quantitative measurement of how far along you are. And getting everything into quantitative terms then allows you to track how you're doing over time. And, of course, as I said, what gets measured gets done. So if you're able to measure and track your progress over time, then you're much more likely to be able to keep yourself on a continuous improvement trajectory. Next slide. As I mentioned, the gap analysis tool is a spreadsheet, and it's meant for measuring your progress. So, of course, in the spreadsheet that you can get with the guide, we have some nifty charts and graphs that you can then use to track how you're doing along different dimensions of asset management, so you can see how things are improving over time. You can set targets and then compare your progress with targets and hopefully keep the organization moving in the right direction. Next slide. Here are some of the dimensions of the analysis. These are actually the categories established in Volume 1 of the guide, which are still just as appropriate 10 years later in Volume 2 of the guide. You look at policy goals and objectives and how well does your policy guidance benefit from improved asset management. Look at planning and programming business processes to see how well those reflect best practice. Look at program delivery and how well you're able to actually deliver the programs you're planning, and how well do the outcomes of those programs, the objectives that you set when you decided to deliver certain projects and programs. And then the information and analysis that feeds into your business processes, looking at the different tools and databases and data collection processes you have to see if they're telling you what you need to know in order to advance through the maturity scale of asset management. Next slide.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And next we have Corey Pope from the Utah DOT. He's the System Planning and Programming Director, and he's going to share with us Utah's experience doing the self-assessment.
Thanks, Jana. This is Corey from Utah DOT. I'm glad to be here today. Utah actually put their foot in the water of asset management quite a while ago, late 90s, and it was a result of a huge investment that we were about to make on our interstate system. And we needed a truly dependable way, I guess, to project the needs for the entire life cycle cost of a project that we were about to spend $1.5 billion on. And as a matter of fact, we started down that road, and as the project was completing, our legislature actually came in and in their wonderful foresight said, we want UDOT to formalize an asset management system, and particularly for that project. Well, fortunately, we had some great leadership at the time. We were already a little ahead of the curve, so we were able to get a jump start on that request. One of the first initiatives that was completed here, and again, this is early on, so it was about the same time that the volume 1 of the guide was being developed. But one of the first initiatives was to perform a self-assessment and try to understand really where we are in the state of Utah in terms of asset management. The intent of self-assessment is really to understand those strengths and weaknesses of an existing program, where we are today, in order to define, I guess, kind of the route or the path that needs to be taken to get to where we need to be. Maybe helps us define our consistencies with current UDOT practices, as well as how consistent we are across the DOT itself, within our existing DOT in thinking. So I guess the other thing that helped us do was to set those priorities. So we find out, that we are where we are. We get a good picture of where we are, and then we have to define priorities, because we obviously can't bite off the whole elephant at once. So we wanted to help set up our priorities of where we wanted to focus our AM efforts. We started out with a fairly large group of employees. There was about 48 total, and it represented 4 distinctive groups in utilized to do the initial assessment. We had a group of senior management that actually was comprised of our executive director and deputy director as well. We had our asset group, which we called it our asset group. They were mainly at the time responsible for just an inventory of what was out there, the amount of surface area pavement, bridges, things like that. We didn't know what asset management was yet. We also brought in our region offices, and those are the folks that really the component they brought in was the ground floor, front line, if you will. And then we also had another group, the 4th and final group, that was our planning and programming, as well as IT, traffic and safety and maintenance, that would bring in other assets that we might want to consider. Really, we've tried to keep it simple in the sense that we kind of looked at an 80-20 rule and said, where are our biggest resources, and focused mainly on pavements and bridges. And in terms of actual development, our modeling capabilities have all focused on pavement up until the last year or so, when we're starting to integrate the bridges. So that's our goal in keeping things simple. We used a select set of questions to do the self-assessment. So each of those 4 groups that I mentioned before was given a set of questions that had been, cultivated from Volume 1 guide. I think the original set of questions Volume 1 had was a little over 50 questions. We kind of felt like, okay, we don't need to know all of this right now, so we simplified things. We ended up with a set of about 20 questions that we put all of those folks through. And, ultimately, the result of this self-assessment exercise provides the framework for what ultimately ends up being our gap analysis, and that was completed the following year in 2003. But it shed a lot of light on things like our linear reference system and improvements that we needed there to be credible with what we were going to produce. Our data collection and quality was another thing that came to light. And then also, where we were with existing models, which were very crude at the time, as well as the budget that what were we willing or what did we need to expend on developing a good, robust asset management system. I think probably the most glaring observation that came out of the self-assessment, though, was really our need to establish an institutionalized philosophy throughout the department. And I'll give a quick example in a minute with the next slide on why that was so important. But we realized we really needed to utilize a top-down emphasis. The themes or philosophies needed to be reflected by senior leaders first and foremost. You can see from this slide that there was a real glaring difference in where senior management thought we were. And this is just one example. This is one question that talks about does policy allow for good performance-based resource allocation. And this is pretty similar to the other questions we asked. But if you look at senior management, they had a belief of where we were existing, but when you get down into the regions and some of the asset groups, it was very different. And I think senior management felt like we had great policy in place, but either the regions didn't understand it, weren't involved with it enough, or truly just felt like it wasn't stout enough to get us where we needed to be. So I think that was probably one of the most glaring things is we needed to really get ourselves on the same page throughout the department. There were a couple specific themes that we focused on, and one of them was we all knew that we didn't have enough money to do everything we needed to do, to build all the new infrastructure and everything. So we had a real emphasis on taking care of what we have or preserving the existing system. We've done a lot of work back in the, even as early as late 70s and throughout the 80s on why good roads cost less, why it's best to keep good roads good and perform preservation treatments early on. And so that was another philosophy that we made sure that trickled down from top management. And although we can't ever totally get rid of this, but there's always a tendency to take your money and put it on the worst roads first. And we made sure that people understood that really that philosophy was out. That just was not going to fly. We were not going to put good money after bad, and we needed to take what money we had and put it towards preserving our good roads and keeping them good. So finally, I guess the result of this is after a detailed analysis of our self-assessment, about a year later, UDOT was able to move forward, develop a very comprehensive asset management implementation plan. It was a very formalized action plan. We tried to focus on the critical low-hanging fruit initially. We wanted to try to create some momentum, get some quick wins. And so looking at some of the, and again, this goes back to the gap analysis, but looking at some of the things that we felt like we could take care of quickly with relatively little cost. Do some of the things like our data collection. That there was I think we felt like we had about 70% of solid data from our data collection, and that came from our asset group. We felt like 70% is not too bad. When you get down into the regions, the credibility of that data was it had no credibility, and so we quickly figured out we needed to find a better way to get that collected, a more objective way, and so that was one of the first wins that we focused on. We developed milestones for every gap or weakness that were identified. Again, that was looking at our linear reference system. We knew we had to improve the LRS to have any sort of credibility in reflecting data and a way to tie it. Our payment distress collection. We also went through and assigned specific people and responsibilities to each of these milestones. We added that accountability, and that was something that was incredibly helpful. When you put an actual name rather than just kind of throw it out to a group, it's It's a big deal. We put schedules for completing all the milestones, and then as a reality check, went back and said, okay, these are all the things we want to become, but do we truly have the resources? And did a pretty good analysis of what resources it was going to take. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of our experience, I guess, with self-assessment. And I probably said a lot more on gap analysis than I intended, but that's kind of it from our standpoint.
Thank you, Corey. So I'm reintroducing Kirk Steidel, who's from the Michigan DOT. He's been leading asset management both at Michigan DOT and nationally, and he's going to share with us asset management, scoping, leadership, and change.
Thanks, Shauna, and I think it really fits nicely with what Corey was just talking about, particularly the leadership piece, and I'll get to that in just a second. But you know, one of the most important things, and I think that it came out in Corey's discussion there, is really understanding the scope. You really have to get your arms around, you know, what are your assets, what are you trying to do, what decisions are you trying to make, identifying which business processes you have in place, and frankly, you know, senior leadership may think you have certain processes in place, and there may be other sub-processes going on that you don't even know are going on, and are maybe counter to what you're trying to do as well. And then, you know, it really gets to a larger discussion as to a real good assessment of what your capabilities are in the form of asset management within your organization. And then key there is what data do you have, who collects it, how many times do you collect it? We heard that earlier as well. You know, so it's really important to scope out what exactly you're trying to do here, because you can run in 1,000 different directions very easily, and you really have to get it nailed down. So really the best approach is you know, a very good project management approach, which you know, it clearly defines the scope, looks at your resources and updates your costs, tracks the schedule, and you know, as every good project, there's going to be things that come along. There's going to be risks that are associated with all of it. You've got to identify those and figure out what you're going to do to mitigate those risks. And then probably one of the most important things is communication. You've got to talk a lot with a lot of people, and it can't just be hidden in one little part of the organization that takes in a bunch of data and then once a year just kicks out a report and says, here's how everybody did. Asset management is really about access to real-time information across the organization by a lot. Next, Jana. So Corey talked about, you know, a lot of the different drivers, why different people are approaching asset management, and depending on your current situation, are you doing this as more of an operations piece or a desire for more effective maintenance, something thrust upon you by the legislature, or is this coming from the top of your organization where you have very strong executive leadership, or is it coming from the planning area? But in general, you have to look at all those, and you have to figure out what's the right approach for your organization. Because I can tell you, as I travel around the country, while all 50 states do similar delivery processes and we deliver similar products, the way we do that is different. And just because of you know, what we might have set up in Michigan, it may not work in your particular state, but the fundamentals are still the same. And when you focus on what are you trying to get to and not trying to fit you know, a square peg in a round hole, I think you end up with a better outcome. So you really have to think about what's critical at that point in time for your organization and what results are you trying to deliver. And frankly, the focus on the results is what's really going to help you in the long term. Next, Jenna. So this slide is a bit of a busy slide. It's maybe a little difficult at times to get your arms around it, but for the most part, you're really talking about in that center box. You need strong leadership to drive asset management. You have to have a culture of asset management. You have to have a culture that accepts change. And change in an organization doesn't just happen because two people decide, oh, this is what we're going to do. It really has to be driven by, is this the right thing to do? How do we go about it? And you have to have the senior leadership involved. So those of you that are driving this, or maybe being driven by your senior leadership saying, we're going to do this, that's a great plus. Those of you that are sitting maybe in the middle saying, hey, this is a new way that we ought to be thinking about here. I need to figure out how to get my senior leadership on board with this. That's an important conversation that you need to continue to have. I think there's a lot of available resources to you that can help with that. Many of them that are on the phone and have participated in the call. But I think the important thing here is connecting the strategies and the programs and delivery. It really is about connecting it all together so that you're using your resources wisely. You know where you want to go. You know what it's going to take to get there. And the decisions are all based around that. Next slide, Jana. So within the guide, you'll see a number of how-to resources. And these are some of the typical change leadership, or a plan for change. And I won't dive into all these. You can all read them. And it doesn't really matter if you're changing a culture or changing a process for asset management or for some other purpose within your organization. A lot of these factors, these key factors, are exactly the same. I mean, you need to convince people about the need for the change and the benefit of the change. You need to communicate that vision over and over and over and over and over. You need to empower people to make those changes. And the bottom one there is really important. You have to anchor that new approach into the culture. That takes a lot of work. You have to continue to discuss all those things up above over and over and over until it just becomes a way of life within your organization. Now, planning for the change, one of the most important things for a senior leader is to look at the organization with a real critical eye and say, well, what's the readiness of this organization to accept this change, whether it's asset management or it's something else. And you've got to look at the leadership structure and say, is it there? Is it ready to go? And then you need to be prepared to develop that communications plan that uses multiple avenues to talk with people. And probably one of the biggest things is that as you develop performance targets or asset management targets and goals, there will be people that will be resistant because they will say, oh, well, we will look bad. Boy, if I put this chart up there, it's going to be red, or it's going to show we're not doing good. Well, that's probably true. I haven't met an organization that does everything perfect. And if your chart shows everything perfect, you're not really being honest with yourself, and frankly, you're probably you're hiding behind a false facade. So you need to be prepared to show the positives and the negatives, everything that's going on, and that's easier said than done in some organizations. There's outside influences that will drive some of those reporting factors. But to get the most out of asset management, you need to be looking at everything that's out there. And just as important, you need to develop those how you're going to communicate those performance measures and the expectations to the general public. So lots of great things, but similar to change in anything else. Jana, turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So in the guide, there are guides like the one that's up on the screen now on building a team, and this is not the only way to build a team, but it walks you through a step-by-step approach, which really focuses, in this case, on building up top management support and making sure that you have those pieces in place before you dive into the implementation phase of asset management implementation. Moving on to the organizational change framework, there's a section in Chapter 3 of the guide which looks at, now, as we know, doing asset management is complex. There are a lot of pieces that have to come together, the engineering, the planning, the management, the administration, and sometimes having tools and frameworks that can help you do that is useful, and we cover several different frameworks that are available and used in agencies, and we're going to just talk today about two of them, the Baldrige framework and the Balanced Scorecard framework. I'd like to introduce Becky Burke. She's from the Maryland State Highway Administration. She's the Performance Excellence Manager in charge of the Baldrige program at the Maryland State Highway Administration, and she'll talk to us about their experience. Becky?
Thanks, Yana. I was going to give you a brief history of Baldrige, but for the sake of time, I'm going to let you Google that. Baldrige is it's a set of criteria under 7 categories, and the criteria are a series of thought that you can see here in the diagram. What makes the criteria different is that they provide a framework for improvement without being prescriptive. And as you can see in the diagram, all 7 categories are related. It begins with leadership and ends with results. And you really can't do one without the other. You must strive to be strong in all 7 categories if you want to be one of the best organizations in the world. We started our assessment in 2004 with the help of 2 consultants, one of which was on the original team that developed this criteria. And we found that we were weak in results after that first round, as we call it. We split the organization in half. The first half did the assessment 1 year, the second half the second year, and then the third year we did an SHA-wide assessment, and that's why I was talking of rounds. So after the first round, we found that we were weak in results. Now what we did was our administrator asked us to honestly answer all those thought-provoking questions and then take a step back and celebrate our strengths and then look for opportunities for improvement. And that's what we did. If you didn't answer it honestly, and you can tell if you don't answer it honestly, if you say everything's all right with the world, you had to do the assessment over again. So everyone took it seriously and honestly answered those questions. It was a bit overwhelming at first. The second time we performed the assessment, it got a little easier. We modified the questions with the help of consultants to conform more to SHA criteria, because the Baldrige criteria were originally for the private sector. And at first, the organization concentrated on categories separately. Everyone was trying to just answer. They would split up this model, and they would try to, one group take strategic planning and one group focus on leadership and so on and so forth. And that doesn't work. You have to connect them all. And by the second time around, they began to see the connection between the categories and realize that you can't just concentrate on one. Next slide, please. One thing we did do to make it a little easier is that we came up with a vision for performance excellence. We combined the 7 Baldrige categories into 5 vision areas, and for some reason 5 doesn't seem as overwhelming as 7 for some reason, but it seemed more manageable for us. And you can see the numbers in these circles. They are the numbers of the Baldrige categories, and you might see some repetitive ones. Category 4 is listed under business planning and workforce planning, and that's because we split it up. All the vision areas are related, and if you have, just like the Baldrige categories are related, for example, if you have leadership with mission, vision, and values, but no strategic plan to carry out your mission, it just won't work. Just as you can manage your processes, but if you don't keep the customer in mind when doing so, you lose your focus. So let's move on real quickly to this car. We liked the Baldrige standard model, and we liked our little vision, but to relate to the organization, we tried to put a model that shows transportation. So we've got this car here, which represents the organization, the workforce. The leader is the driver, and the strategic plan is the business plan with the objectives that drill down to the outcome measures, and those are our results. You have your processes that drive this organization, and they result in quality, efficiency, and output measures. And you can see that our focus is on customers. And also you can just see that the gas tank measure is our balanced scorecard, which I'm not going to go into because you're going to hear about that next. So anyway, that's briefly what we did, and I'm going to turn it back over to Yana.
Thanks, Becky. I'd like to introduce Martin Kidner. He is the state planning engineer from the Wyoming Department of Transportation, and he's going to share with us Wyoming DOT's experience with the balanced scorecard.
Yeah, thank you. And Becky did a great lead-in on this, too. To kind of set the stage on this, as far as, especially as an asset manager, looking at those strategic documents and everything that the DOT has in order to get this. We were kind of a latecomer into the asset management world, so the balanced scorecard was at least kind of set in jello out there. But you can really see from the slide there that really the idea with the balanced scorecard is taking your measures, but the whole idea of balancing them between the customer, the financial, the internal business practices, and the learning and growth. But that the issues that I really want to stress out there is that there are competing needs that are out there in the world, and we all know these things. But really, the key and the bedrock to it is the measurable objectives that we have. And so, if you could go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I'm using some of those measures and measurable objectives in order to display these items. So, we just pulled one down there that was our safety balance scorecard, where it's you can see there that we have various things that I measure out there, the fatality rate and so forth. But really, when you look at the little dial over there, that what you see. And really what I wanted to kind of just throw out to the group is a reminder that, the roads and the airports down there are physical assets, and by that, we kind of define that as that's the asset management world. And so my job as the asset manager is all of those measures that we have rolling up to indicate to the executive staff that 51% in good or excellent condition. How do we do that, and how do we actually have that up? The other things that are out there, the customer satisfaction, the percent of seatbelt uses and so forth, those are performance measures that I am, of course, very interested in because those are important to the state of Wyoming, but they're not things for the asset management. So, you look at the overall strategic plan of the organization and how it's broken out using the balanced scorecard to define measures. There are the things where asset management is the physical features of the roadways that we have out there, not so much the behaviorals and so forth. And so, really what I want to stress with this is that the key that I'm trying to work with on this is that now that I know that the roadway measure that I have, which is a composite measure for that 51% in good or excellent condition, now my job takes over as the ability to start putting this in there in order to give you an overall view of it, but what percent of good and excellent on the interstates versus the primaries and so forth is not shown here, but those are the things that to roll it up to be able to show my director and so forth of where we're standing on this. Not only that, but also predicting out into the future using those measures. And because we're kind of short of time, I think I'll just turn it back over to you to continue on with the webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. And I think we're going to stop the technical part here because we'll cover the performance management and the level of service indicators in the next webinar because it's a good part of the development of the asset management plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and ask if there were questions during the webinar.
Yes, so there are. So I got a question from a couple people about where can I get the actual guide? Came up last time. If you're a member of AASHTO, a member state, then each state gets 10 free copies. They get addressed to the director or the CEO or the secretary. So go to the secretary's office, and that's where they get delivered to, and so that's where you should find your copies. There's another question from...
Well, Matt, I mean, if they can't find it, they can always purchase it through the AASHTO.
Correct. So if you want to purchase a copy, you can go to the AASHTO bookstore. We have it in a traditional print version, hard copy, and you get a PDF along with that. We also have a web-based version, which you can purchase. And the web-based version is a little bit different from a PDF file. It's more, it's very much, you have to have an internet browser to sort of look at it, but it's they have a lot of nice features in terms of connections and hyperlinks and everything in there. So there are 3 different versions out there, hard copy, PDF, and then a web-based version. And I think they're going, the selling price right now is like around $100 and I want to say $120 for members. So that has to do with the guides and where you can access them. We have some questions coming in. The first one is, what are some successful software systems you've seen used for transportation asset management? And we can direct that one either to the presenters or the consultants who are on board today.
Do any people want to give a quick answer? We will cover that in webinar 4 under the tools and techniques. While we will talk specifically in the guide about, I think there are some references to available systems. I think this question is better answered by DOT folks if you have answers. We can throw it out at the next webinar as well. I know some people had to leave.
The next one is from Richard Dunn. It's for Kirk specifically. It says, and his question is, in Map 21, is the collection of asset data for your asset management outside of the traditional bridge, pavement, and traffic eligible for federal funding? Examples would be inventorying and condition asset of culverts, sign structures, noise, walls, etc. I'm not sure if Kirk is still on the line.
Yeah, say that again.
Oh, and so in Map 21, there's a need for a asset management plan and data collection associated with that. Do we know if funding is available for assets outside of the traditional bridges, pavements arena in the area of culverts, sign structures, ITS, noise, walls, etc.?
Well, I would say that one of the other things that Map 21 does is takes 110 different categories and whittles them down to 30. So it provides more flexibility to states to develop those. I would say it is within the allotment that we're all going to get, and that it then becomes a state decision as to how to divvy that up. But I do not think there's extra money in there for development of the plan. I can tell you that once you do it, you will ultimately save money in the long run because you'll make better decisions.
Nastron, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just want to mention that under the current law, the data collection activity and data analysis is covered as long as it is related to state transportation planning. So if it falls into that category, it's covered.
Okay. So next question is, will this presentation be available to print? And yes. So we'll make all the presentations as well as the actual webinars will be available on the tam.transportation.org website. So you can be able to click on the video, watch the webinar, or download the slides. Next question is, how do the 14 steps of TAM implementation fit in with the maturity scale? I'm going to let Jana take that one.
Yep. So they are definitely related. I can't think if there's a one-for-one relationship, but every aspect of the maturity model is covered in the guide. Mark is the one who developed the gap analysis tool. Is there a direct mapping of them to the 14 steps, Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I can't recall that it's exactly mapped, so like it doesn't. I don't think it says step 1, step 2, and then it kind of correlates them. But to be honest, it wouldn't be very hard to do that because it's it's a very well structured list and there's quite a number of points. So it's something that could be done in summary.
Yeah,
and I would say they're orthogonal to each other. You can be at any stage of maturity in any of those 14 steps.
Yeah, but I guess I understood the question to be, when those element and sub-element questions are being asked, how do they map to the 14 steps? And so I think that, yes, there's a relationship. It's not explicitly stated in the guide.
Yeah, there may be a relationship in some cases.
Yeah.
Last question is, is there an electronic version, I guess, of the self-assessment survey available? And let me answer that one, that there's the NCHRP a synthesis project ongoing right now, which is looking at the current state of the practice in terms of asset management for each of the states. The synthesis team has sent out a survey request to each of the state DOT asset management coordinators or contact persons to fill out the actual, self-assessment survey. So an electronic version is available. You can also download what was referred to as Volume 1 of the Asset Management Guide free of charge from the AASHTO bookstore. If you want that, you can go to the AASHTO bookstore website and download it. If you can't find it, send me an email, and I can forward to you the PDF file of Volume 1, which has the self-assessment guide in it, if you want to take a look at that. But also, if you're an asset management sort of contact person for your state, a manager or whatever, please look for the email from Omar Zamadi, who is part of the synthesis consultant team doing that project. We have one other question from Steve Gunther, and I'm going to let Kirk answer this one if he's still on the line. It says, Steve says, please distinguish between performance management and asset management.
Great, thanks, Matt. Actually, there was lots of discussion about those two, and asset management deals with the physical assets, and that's the definition that between AASHTO, Federal Highway, and come up with. Asset management is the physical assets, the roads, bridges, culverts, tunnels, walls, guardrail, whatever. Performance management deals with the performance of the entire network. While one of them might be preservation or the existing facilities that would take some of the asset management data into it, other parts of it would include performance management for the environment or performance management for congestion or for reliability. So larger overall system performance as opposed to the performance of a specific asset, which would then, and again, the specific asset is covered under asset management.
All right. Thanks, Kirk. That is the last of the questions. Jan, I'm going to turn it over to you to sort of close us out.
Yes, and this is the final wrap-up. And, Matt, why don't I just walk through this?
Okay.
So today we got an orientation on the Asset Management Guide organization, and the tools now that are available to you to assess where you are and where you want to go and conduct a self-assessment and a gap analysis. The importance of leadership and proactively manage your organization. And the last bullet we didn't cover, we're going to put that into the next webinar. Thank you for joining us for this one. And our next webinar will be on Wednesday, November 30th from 2 to 4 Eastern Time, same time. And the one following that will be on December 14th at the same time. And we hope you will join us for that. And if you have any suggestions for how to improve the webinar, note to Matt.
Thank you.
Sounds good, Matt? Anything else?
Nope, that's good. Thanks, Jana.
Okay, bye, everyone.